she saved a life today. She learned to carry her own power, and none of it will matter, because something has found her scent. I am the first memory. They cast her out for her magic, and the forest named her its last hope. But the hunt has already begun. This is Chapter 13, The Heavy Foundation.
Golden light, filtered through the high, star-scraping canopy of the heartwood, arrived as a silent beckoning that pulled Kaelin back from the dark. She lay still for a long moment, her senses returning in slow, tentative ripples. The air in the sanctuary was cool and held a new, crystalline clarity. Every rustle of the willow leaves sounded like a sharp intake of breath, vibrating against the back of her throat. Ancient resin coated the inside of her lungs with every breath, thick and sticky, clinging to the back of her throat, refusing to be exhaled. Her spirit had been forged into something sharp and cold, yet as she tried to shift, the earth reached up and gripped her. An invisible hand pulled at her left side, pinning her to the moss. Rowan sat a few feet away, his one intelligent eye fixed on her with a look of quiet, canine expectation. He did not bark or nudge her. He simply waited for her to acknowledge the change. Turning her head, Kaelin looked for the oak sentinel. The towering colossus she had spoken to was gone. In its place stood the same moss-covered boulder she had seen upon her arrival, a silent, unmoving mountain of gray stone and petrified bark. The points of amber light had vanished from its features. The Guardian had returned to the dormancy of the earth, leaving Kaelin alone with a promise as heavy as the stone itself. A stray strand of hair tickled her cheek, and she instinctively reached up to brush it away. Her brain was still calibrated for a girl of flesh and bone, yet her left arm possessed a mass that defied logic. The limb did not respond with a familiar, light grace. It moved with the sudden, fossilized weight of solid lead. Instead of a gentle touch, her knuckles slammed into her forehead with a hollow, wooden clack. Kaelin gasped as stars exploded in her vision. Her head snapped back against the moss, her skull ringing as if she had been struck by a falling branch. The arm refused to acknowledge her command. It lay beside her like a discarded beam, a foreign object she was forced to drag along behind her shoulder. She stared at her forearm, where the dark, root-like lines of the stonebark sigil remained silent and hushed. The skin around the mark felt tight and unnaturally firm. A hide of leather stretched over a core of unyielding granite. Moving with extreme caution, she tried to sit up. She rolled onto her right side and planted her left hand on the forest floor to push herself upward. The ground offered no support. As soon as she applied pressure, her left hand sank. It did not just compress the moss, it punched through the velvety green and drove deep into the rich, dark soil, burying her up to the wrist. She felt like a sapling that had grown a branch of solid granite on one side, threatening to pull her entire frame into the dirt. Every time she tried to heave her torso to the right, the arm acted like an anchor, pinning her to the mud. 16 years of instinct failed her. Reaching, bracing, lifting, actions once as natural as breathing, had become a complex problem of physics and will. She was a stranger in her own skin, a creature of soft flesh trying to carry the world in a single, petrified arm. Rowan tilted his head, letting out a short, sharp huff. It was a canine sigh that felt suspiciously like a laugh. Kaelin glared at him, her breath coming in rasping pants. She tried to lift the arm again, focusing every ounce of her concentration on the task. Her shoulder muscles bunched and strained until they burned. The tendons in her neck stood out like cords. The arm rose an inch, then two, before falling back into the dirt with a heavy, humiliating splash of mud. She was the seed of renewal and the key to the pact, yet she looked like a beetle flipped on its back, struggling against her own gravity. The oak sentinel's words returned to her now as a low, rumbling memory. The law of stonebark is not a weapon for the swift or a shield for the weak. It is the law of endurance. It is the strength to remain standing when the world falls silent. Standing felt like a distant, impossible dream. She looked at her hand, still buried in the earth, and realized the first thing she had to endure was her own power. Rowan's amusement finally faded. He rose from his haunches, padding across the emerald moss with soundless steps toward the muddy hollow where Kaelin remained pinned by her own weight. The dog offered no help. He did not even nudge her toward the safety of her discarded satchel. Instead, he performed a gesture that defied every canine instinct. He pressed his right front paw firmly against the stonebark sigil marking her skin. The contact was a jolt, a sudden, low-frequency vibration that raced from his pads into her skin. Kaelin tried to pull her arm away. The movement only drove her hand deeper into the soil. "Rowan, stop," she hissed, her face flushed with the heat of her own failure. "I can't move it. It's too heavy. I'm not strong enough." His canine eye, bright with an ancient intelligence, met hers. He did not move his paw. Instead, he intensified the vibration. A resonant thrum began to hum within the clearing, a sound that originated not from his throat, but from his very connection to the earth. It matched the rhythmic beat Kaelin had felt from the heartwood tree. As the hum grew louder, the dark lines on Kaelin's arm began to react. The root-like patterns of the sigil did not glow with the violent intensity of the forging. Instead, they began to pulse with a slow and steady amber light, the color of sun-warmed sap. The vibration sank through her muscle and into her bones. Understanding sank into her, deep as the mountain's roots. Her struggle had been a fundamental error of logic. Mortal tendons and the simple strength of a village girl were never meant to move such mass. Pitting her flesh against a weight that belonged to the mountain was a fool's errand. Kaelin had to stop fighting the stone. The limb was not a burden to be lifted, but an anchor to be grounded. To stand, she had to become it. "Remember the song," she whispered to herself. A frantic attempt to recall the harmony she had felt at the tree. The futile struggle ceased. Her breath slowed as Kaelin matched her heartbeat to the rhythmic pulse of the sigil. With her eyes closed, she turned her focus inward, sifting through the silence for the specific frequency Rowan sent humming through his touch. Mortal strength was not the answer. Instead of force, she searched for harmony, a way to move with the stone rather than against it. Kaelin found the note, a deep, subvocal hum that resonated in the hollows of her bones. She sang the note back to her own arm, projecting her will into the dark, wooden lines of the sigil. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. The dragging, heavy sensation vanished. The limb did not become light in the way a feather is light. It became a part of the earth's own balance. The mass remained, but it no longer fought her. The sigil vibrated with a deep and grounded resonance as the petrified stiffness transformed into a sturdy, unyielding power. Moving with a slow and deliberate grace, Kaelin lifted her left hand. The limb rose effortlessly, shedding the 4 inches of mud as if it were nothing more than water. The hand appeared unchanged in the morning light, yet an impossible density was now settled within her arm. Gone was the earlier clumsiness. In its place, a profound sense of solidity took root. Kaelin was no longer a girl out of balance. Rowan withdrew his paw. A single, sharp bark erupted from his throat, a note of pure approval that echoed through the quiet willows. To Kaelin, the sound arrived as more than a noise. It felt like a bolt of support that traveled down her spine and grounded her flickering resolve. Kaelin placed both hands on the earth and pushed. Under her hands, the moss and the soil held strong. The ground no longer swallowed her weight. Instead, it offered a solid resistance that answered the unyielding earth now anchored within her frame. Her body rose with the slow, inevitable power of a standing stone being righted. She stood up for the first time as a pact keeper. Beneath her, the forest floor felt different. Her feet planted themselves in the dirt with a grip so deep it seemed as though she could withstand a hurricane. The world was no longer a place that threatened to knock her down. It was a place she was now built to endure. "I understand," Kaelin breathed, looking down at the silver dog. "It isn't about lifting. It's about becoming the stone." The transition from the heart grove struck like a physical blow. Crossing the invisible boundary of the sanctuary, the nourishing warmth of the heartwood tree vanished. A biting, sterile chill replaced it. The air pressed against her skin like a layer of damp iron, leaching the very warmth from her blood. The scent of ancient resin died. In its place, the parched odor of the gray rot returned, carrying the sharp, chalky tang of bone dust. The vibrant colors of the sanctuary were a memory. Here, the forest was a gallery of gray shadows and unmoving skeletons. Rowan halted at the edge of a clearing. A low vibration thrummed in his chest. The forest floor had given way to a lightless, crumbling pit, a massive sinkhole where the roots had turned to dust, leaving nothing but a thin crust of soil to hold back the dark. Once sturdy enough to support the weight of the wood, the timber had been turned to brittle ash. Under the pressure of the earth, the petrified wood had snapped like dry glass, causing a catastrophic collapse of the soil. Dust still hung in the heavy air, a slow, gray haze of ground roots that caught the light like thousands of tiny, dead scales suspended in the gloom. A sound of grinding granite rose from the depths of the pit. Kaelin stepped toward the crumbling edge. Her boots possessed a new, impossible gravity. They did not slip on the loose earth, but found a stubborn and heavy grip that made her feel as though she were part of the very foundation she stood upon. At the bottom of the 15-foot drop lay a creature of the deep wood, a stone-clad turtle. It looked more like a piece of the mountain than a living animal. A sharp, wordless grief caught in Kaelin's throat as she watched the ancient creature struggle. The forest was betraying its own, turning its patient strength into a cage of ash. Turtle's shell was a single, massive slab of weathered granite. Small, delicate wildflowers had once carpeted the stone, but they were now wilting. The tiny, vibrant world on the creature's back was snuffed out, dust settling over the petals until the last trace of color vanished beneath the gray. A fallen, petrified log pinned the turtle's front legs to the floor of the pit. Every struggle drew more debris down from the unstable walls. The dry, rasping sound of earth sliding over stone echoed through the hollow, the sound of the forest burying its own children. Dust rained onto the turtle's head. With every rasping, labored pull of its lungs, the ashen grit threatened to clog the airway and steal the last of its strength. The rot continued its patient meal at the edges of the sinkhole. Fresh clumps of earth tumbled into the shadows. Survival was now a matter of minutes. The turtle turned its head. Its eyes were great, liquid pools of amber, clouded by centuries. It moved with a painful slowness that made Kaelin's own sigil thrum in sympathy. The animal did not cry out. It simply watched Kaelin, a silent witness to its own unmaking. The creature was too heavy to climb and too trapped to hide. It was a victim of the silence, waiting for the end. The frustration of her earlier clumsiness evaporated. A fierce, protective heat took its place. Kaelin realized her new strength was not a gift for herself, nor was it a tool to be used in a quiet garden. She had been given the sigil of Stonebark to act as a foundation for those who could no longer hold themselves up. "I see you," she whispered into the pit. A sudden, electric tension made the fur along Rowan's back prickle and stand on end. He watched her with a silent, predatory alertness as the crumbling soil prepared to surrender to the dark. The ground sounded like it was going to swallow the creature whole. Kaelin didn't hesitate. She tightened the straps of her satchel and prepared to descend into the ruin. The edge of the sinkhole groaned as more soil gave way. Kaelin didn't wait for a spirit's command or a sign from the trees. She scrambled down the steep, crumbling slope, her heavy left arm acting as a counterweight that nearly pulled her face first into the dirt. Dust choked her lungs, tasting of dry minerals and the bitter ash of the rot. At the bottom of the pit, the stone-clad turtle resembled a jagged fragment of living bedrock. It lay hopelessly pinned beneath the crushing, suffocating weight of a petrified oak log that had collapsed across its front legs. The animal's amber eyes found hers. "I've got you," she whispered. The sound was a small human vibration in the hollow silence. A sharp crack echoed through the crumbling hollow. Above her, the eastern wall of the sinkhole began to slide, releasing a mass of roots and stones, held together by nothing but the memory of their own strength. Tons of earth prepared to bury them both. Fear flared, yet the instinct to flee never reached Kaelin's legs. A cold, hard clarity surged from the sigil of stonebark, sharpening her focus until the world seemed to slow to a crawl. Abandoning all thought of safety, Kaelin stepped between the ancient creature and the descending mountain of earth. Her boots bit fiercely through the loose soil to anchor her frame in the dense, unyielding earth buried below. With her heavy left arm raised, she pressed her palm flat against the cold, cascading face of the collapsing wall. "Stand," she commanded. The word vibrated with the low thrum of the sigil. The jolt traveled through her wrist and hammered into her shoulder. The pressure of the collapsing dirt tried to fold her spine, yet the sigil of stonebark held her rigid. Magic bypassed her muscle to coil around her bones, reinforcing the arm until it possessed the endurance of ironwood. A torrent of loose topsoil and shattered roots cascaded over her shoulders, threatening to bury her alive beneath a suffocating wave of gray ash. The sheer, crushing mass of the collapsing wall tried to drive her to her knees in the shadows, yet Kaelin refused to yield. The weight was immense. This was the strength the sentinel had promised. This was the power to remain standing. "Rowan, now." The dog acted without a heartbeat of delay. He moved to the petrified log with his paws light on the shifting debris. Pushing his weight beneath the timber, he used the leverage of a nearby stone to shift the burden just enough. The turtle found its release. With a slow, grinding effort, the ancient creature pulled its legs free. It began the arduous climb up the root ladder Kaelin had cleared during her descent. Teeth aching from the pressure, Kaelin held the line. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts. She was the only thing standing between a living creature and the silence of the earth. A memory of her father flared through the white-hot strain. She saw him lifting the massive main beam of their cottage after a winter storm. He had stood with his feet rooted and his shoulders square, an unbreakable wall against the ruin. He had been a fortress for her then. Now she was becoming a fortress for the forest. Her left arm felt as if it were turning to granite. The skin grew cold and hard, yet as the turtle reached the top, a fierce joy ignited in her chest. Kaelin was not a monster. She was the foundation. With a final explosive push of her will, she shoved the wall back and threw herself toward the slope. Behind her, the sinkhole collapsed with a sound like a falling sky. A cloud of gray dust billowed out, coating the moss in a layer of ash. Kaelin lay at the top of the ridge, gasping for air. Her left arm was heavy once more, but as she looked at the turtle, safely navigating the thicket, the weight no longer felt like a burden. It was a badge of office. Kaelin remained on the ridge for a long moment. Her left hand rested flat against the moss, still grounding the excess energy from the sigil of stonebark. The quiet rustle of the ancient creature retreating into the undergrowth should have been the only sound in the settling dust. Yet a cold and sudden tremor traveled up Kaelin's grounded arm, a sequence of heavy, measured impacts beating through the deep earth with an unnatural and terrifying precision. Nature possessed a predictable rhythm. Kaelin knew the light, erratic dance of a deer and the heavy, rolling gait of a bear. She had spent a decade reading the language of the soil. This new tremor was different. Each thud was spaced with a flawless, lethal calculation. The rhythm was hauntingly familiar. It sounded like the steady, heavy crack of her father's wood axe against the chopping block in the early morning. The vibration shuddered through her bones, making the sigil of stonebark flare with a sharp, sickening cold as the living magic within her instinctively recoiled from the lifeless impacts. Suddenly, the sanctuary died. The cheerful chatter of the spirit birds and the steady hum of insects vanished in a heartbeat. It was not a natural quiet. It was a hostile, consuming pressure that forcibly crushed the joyous noise out of the air until nothing but a sterile vacuum remained. The song of the heart grove was being smothered by an encroaching, sterile silence. A cold spot formed in the air, moving toward the clearing with the inevitability of a winter frost. This was the hush made mobile. This was the stillness hunting for a target. Rowan stood over Kaelin. A jagged ridge of fur rose along his spine. Amidst the matted brown of his dirty coat, a hidden stripe of silver flared in the golden light of the forest. It cut through the layers of dust like a sliver of liquid moonlight. He did not growl. He simply stared into the dark thicket with his one good eye fixed and lethal. The scent of forgetting arrived on a sudden, airless draft. The dry odor of old bones and ashen dust. Rowan recognized the presence. He knew that the predator they had sensed in the vault was on the move. The cold, unyielding presence was actively closing the distance, carving a path of silence. Sanctuary was a lie. The heart grove could no longer act as a shield. "He has my scent," Kaelin whispered, a shard of ice in her chest. She didn't know who was coming, only that the silence had identified her as the source of the noise. The memory of the hunter's cold, calculated march from her vision returned. It was a rigid and unswerving line of purpose, carved straight through the ancient woods, refusing to bend or alter its course for any natural barrier. Kaelin scrambled to her feet, with her left arm dragging like dead weight. The sheer, petrified mass was a constant reminder of the vow that now bound her to the deep earth. She couldn't hide, and she couldn't return to the village. She had to move, trusting her new, ironwood bones to endure the journey. Kaelin turned toward the deeper woods. Rowan took the lead, his form a ghost in the shadows. They fled into the trees, just as the first gray frost began to creep over the ridge, turning the vibrant moss into a brittle crust of ash.
She went into that pit, a frightened girl. She came out a foundation. But there is no rest for her now. Something walks the forest in a straight line, leaving only silence behind it. And it has her scent. She cannot hide. She can only run. And the loyal creature running at her side is about to show her what he has truly been all along. I remain the first memory. Watch the shadows, for they are watching you.